Hey everyone, this is MusicTechHelpGuy, and welcome to part 18 of my Music Theory for Producers course. In this video, I want to do something a little bit different than I usually do with this series, and I want to talk to you guys about the power chord in popular music. So with a name like power chord, this might imply that the chord has something really special to it, that maybe there's some very special structure to it. When in all actuality, the power chord is very simple. It's derived from old school rock and roll and blues music. Basically, if you take any triad, any major or minor triad that is, this excludes diminished and augmented triads, say like C major, for example, which is C, E, G, and you exclude the thirds. So in C, E, G, take out the E, and now you're just left with C, G. And you play the two of those together, you basically just get an interval of what's called a perfect fifth. The distance between C and its fifth, G, is a perfect fifth. That's a power chord. That's really all a power chord is. Now, you can form a power chord off of any note on the guitar, the piano, whatever instrument it is. So G, we have G and its fifth is D. E and its fifth, which is B. C and G, like we did before. D and A. And you can also do it with an extra note, as opposed to just C and G. You could do C, G, and then an extra octave C, and you can do that with any of these. So C, G, C. Or G, D, G. Or E, B, E. Or D, A, D. Just a side note about the perfect fifth interval. If you want to be able to find the perfect fifth above any note, simply take your starting note, count that as 0, and then count up to 7, and the 7th note above your root note will be your perfect fifth. So, for example, if we start on C and we count up 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you'll see that we land on G. So perfect fifth above C is G. And this works for any root note. You just count the root note as 0, and then you count up to 7 above it. So the first example I played that you all probably recognize is Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana. And the chords for that, the power chords for that, are F, B flat, A flat, and D flat, but played as power chords. So we have a fifth and another root on top of each one of those. And then there's just a strumming pattern that's added to it. Now, power chords, because they don't have thirds, are neither major nor minor. However, power chords tend to have an implied quality to them based on the notes around them, the notes in the vocal melody and the keyboards or other instruments that are in the song, and also just the arrangement of the chords. If we just take the 4 root notes of those power chords in Smells Like Teen Spirit, you'll find that we end up with 4 chords, if we, with thirds omitted, that are within the key of F minor. Another way to think about it would be to think about Roman numerals. If we really want to, we could think about it as the 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 3 chord, and the 6 chord, with all 4 chords having their thirds omitted. Now, the way that power chords are notated on the staff is just you put the root note, so the first one's F, and you put a 5 next to it, F5. That designates that this is an F with a fifth above it, and it's an F power chord. So this would be F5, B flat 5, A flat 5, and D flat 5. Another example would be You Really Got Me by the Kinks. It rides back and forth between F5 and G5. And then later on in the verse, it bumps up basically 2 semitones. So it goes up to G5 and A5. And then later on, again, it moves up again, and we end up with this. So we have C and D5. So we have F5, F5 to G5, G5 to A5, and then C5 to D5. And I'm paraphrasing, of course, those sections are actually played a little longer than what I played them. Now, there is a little bit of theory to the power chord, and there are some alterations. As we talked about in some previous episodes, diminished triads exist within both major and minor keys. So if I were to play, let's say, all of the power chords in E major, starting on the bottom E of my guitar here, basically playing a major scale with a perfect fifth on top of each one, you'd find that one chord is incorrect, and that is the 7 chord. For this in E major, it is D sharp, which goes up to E, because the 7 chord in a major key is actually diminished. So it should be, as opposed to. So typically when you're using power chords, you alter, if you do end up with a 7 chord in a major key, you either alter it to raise the 5th, so you end up with a perfect 5th on that 7 chord, or what you do is you lower the root, so you end up having what's called a flat 7. So let me play the whole thing. I'll play it major, and then I'll play it major again with the lowered 7. And then with the lower 7. Now, by lowering the 7th and making this like basically a flat 7 power chord, you're tapping into a mode, a special mode called the Mixolydian scale, or the Mixolydian mode. And we'll talk more about modes in a later video, but just know that the Mixolydian scale is essentially the same thing as a major scale, but just with a lowered 7th note. Now, we can do the same thing for minor. If I did the same thing and played a power chord for every single note in a minor key, we'd run into an issue on the 2 chord, because remember that the 2 chord in a minor key is diminished. So really we should play it like this, with the 2 chord having that diminished 5th. Doesn't sound too nice though. So there's 2 alterations here as well. You can either take that 5th in the 2 chord and move it up a half step to end up with a power chord as opposed to a diminished interval, or you can lower the root of that chord down to lower the entire chord. Same thing we did with the 7 chord in a major key. So this taps into what's called the Phrygian scale. The Phrygian scale or mode is the same thing as minor with the 2nd note lowered. It's a very common alteration in heavy metal and hard rock. So let me play the minor scale, natural minor scale with all power chords, and then I'll play the Phrygian scale with all power chords. And then Phrygian. So again, we're just altering the 2 chord to lower its root down or raise its 5th up to create 2 chords that we can have for the 2 chord. And again, in major, we did the same thing for the 7 chord. A really well-known song in the heavy metal world that uses the Phrygian power chords is the middle section of Creeping Death by Metallica. It goes like this. For all intents and purposes, the song is in E minor, but the power chords in this section are E5, and then it goes up to F, which is a flatted 2, and then it goes down to D5, and then back up to E, and then G5, F5, E5, and everything I'm doing in between, this stuff, pedaling off of the low E string. So this is an E5 with some low notes just pedaling on E. And by the way, that sound is called a palm mute. You take your hand and you put it on the bridge and you mute the strings, and that's what creates that sound. So again, here's the example from Creeping Death again. Another example of this would be Blood and Thunder by Mastodon. It's got a similar sort of Phrygian sound to it, although that song is downtuned. The song downtunes the low E string down to a low D. So let me do that real quick. So by downtuning the low E to a D, it actually makes power chords easier to play. Instead of doing this sort of motion, I can actually use one finger to bar down the bottom three notes and create a root fifth root power chord. And all those are power chords that I just played. Very common thing to do in rock and heavy metal. So getting back to the Mastodon example, it goes like this. So it's D5 with some pedaling after it, similar to the Creeping Death example. And then it's C5, then back to D5. So we get this D5, C5 pattern. And then it goes from D5 up to E flat 5. So the song, for all intents and purposes, is in D minor, but we're using that flatted 2 power chord of E flat rather than using E. That's actually in the key of D minor. So that's just a rough overview of the power chord in pop and rock music. Like I said, very simple. Just take any major or minor triad, remove the third, and you end up with a power chord. And to notate it, you put a 5 after it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching.